let's explore the color workflow in Adobe Animate together.
TipTut.
Welcome back to Intro to Adobe Animate 2021. In this episode, we explore working with color both in theory and in the software, and we'll do some practical work by adding color to our animation, which at the moment is looking a little bit unfinished. So let's get right to it. Part 4. Color, gradients, and effects. Picking the right colors for an animation is a skill unto itself, but if you know a little bit of color theory, it can be much less daunting. When picking colors, you should look for a few key things: contrast and harmony. You can see which colors complement each other by using the color wheel as a starting point. Now, I have a video on color theory which goes into much more detail, so watch that if you'd like a deep dive into color theory, but I'll explain the basics here. Complementary colors are those that are directly opposite each other on the color wheel. This doesn't mean that they are the best and only combination, it just means that they have the most contrast between each other in terms of hue. There are other types of color palettes that pick from different parts of the color wheel, and a great way to explore this is with Adobe Color at color.adobe.com. There are tons of tools out there similar to this one, but this is as good as any. So I'm going to take you through two different color selection tools, essentially. It's going to be color.adobe.com and coolers.co. Color.adobe gives you a bit more nuanced control in terms of color harmonies, and coolers is a great starting point if you've just got no idea what you want. So we've spoken about complementary colors, and a complementary color is opposite on the color wheel. And what Adobe Color does is give you 5 colors to start with, and you can just drag around your color wheel here. Find a particular shade that you'd like, for example, this kind of rich pink color, and it will automatically find the complementaries and a couple of shades or tints to go along with that complementary color, which is great. Incidentally, you can also adjust within the confines of that color harmony, in this case complementary. You can adjust the shades and tints and saturations and things as well. There's analogous, monochromatic, triad, split complementary, double split complementary. Like I said, I'm not going to go through the theory of this. I've done that in a different episode, but I am going to say that if you go and click around on these, you will clearly see which ones give you more or less color selections to pick from. In this case, we're going to need, I think, approximately 3 main colors. If we take a look at our file, here in Adobe Animate, we're going to need something for the grass, something for the sky and mountains, and something for our main character here. There's obviously going to be additional other colors that you're going to see in the animation, but it's mostly going to be 3 main colors. I quite like this guy to be pink, and I'd like to maintain some kind of accurate color system with green grass and blue sky. So for example, in Adobe Color, I might choose a split complementary, which gives me 3 main colors, and place one of them on pink. And you'll notice you'll be able to adjust with your base color. So if I chose this base color here as pink, I can adjust individually the split complementary, because all split complementary means is you have to have an equidistant amount between the opposite complementary color. So the opposite of pink here would be green, and the split complementary would be an equidistant color from either side of that green. So you could choose, for example, something closer to blue. Now, just because these colors are in this palette doesn't necessarily mean that I need to use them all. For example, if I like this pink and these 2 shades of blue, I don't need to use the yellows. I could pick another one. For that instance, double split complementary might be a little bit better. Basically play around, see if you can find something that you like. Now, I like to use coolers.co because I can just press the space bar and it will bring up 5 new unique colors to work with. And additionally, if you find a color within a palette that you like, for example, once I find a nice hot pink here that I quite like the look of, I can lock off an individual color and then keep generating new ones that fit within that palette until I find something that I like again. For example, maybe this color for the sky, I can lock them off and it will continue to find colors that work well. Now, when I say complementary here, I don't mean in terms of the color wheel complementing the opposite side of the color wheel. I just mean colors that look good together. Yeah. Now, what I like to do is start off with one color that I know I'm going to like. So this pink, for example, and maybe a blue as well that I like, and then go into Adobe Animate, and from there use a few different tricks I've learned to generate the rest of my colors. I mainly use sites like this as a starting point, and then from there I can tweak to my own needs within the certain file that I'm working on. So let's jump right into that and we'll carry on from there. Okay, so here we are in Adobe Animate. As you can see, I've got the 2 colors, pink and blue, that I liked from my color palette. And using these, we're going to generate all the necessary shades and tints and things that we need for the rest of our animation. Now, these are just some rectangles that I dragged out onto the stage. You can pick the fill color from this box down here and the stroke color from this box down here. You'll notice when you select them, you get a whole bunch of predefined colors. I don't recommend that you use these. You can if you'd like, but they're just not, everyone's going to use them if they're there. You need to use something that's a bit more of your own. So I'm just going to zoom in down here on my colors so that we can see what we're working with. And I'm just going to, holding Alt and Shift, I'm just going to drag out a few copies of these colors as well, like so. Now, let's first talk about tints and shades and how to find darker and lighter copies of a color that you enjoy. Now, you could just go select a color, choose Window and color to bring up the color box here. And you could just say, all right, I'm just going to add some more black to that color. And voila, we've got a darker shade of that pink. But you'll notice that it starts to look a little bit muddy because all we've done is add some more shade, i.e. adding direct black to that color, which is going to make it look muddy because it's just direct black. We're just decreasing the amount of light or increasing the amount of pigment, depending on how you want to work. What I prefer to do is a technique called hue shifting. And what hue shifting is you can select a slightly darker color within your pink. Sure, that's no problem. But as you can see, you get a little bit of that muddiness back in there. So hue shifting is you just take your hue slider and you shift it more towards a warmer or cooler color. For example, you can go more slightly towards red and then choose the darker instance, or you could go more slightly towards pink and then choose the darker instance and try to maintain that feeling of warmth. And as you can see, we then get a slightly darker version of the pink without it looking muddy. You can go back towards the red and you get a more red one, obviously. But if we just copy out a few examples here, and I'll see if I can can't really make the window bigger, but that's fine. Essentially, you just hue shift a little bit, like so, decrease the brightness just a little bit, like so, and increase the saturation a little bit, and you get a less muddy. It's not really a shade, but it works as a darker color. If you wanted it to be even darker, you could push it further down like this, but just by hue shifting that just a little bit, you can see how you reduce that amount of muddiness. Now, if you like the muddiness, that's fine, but I really don't. So that's one technique to get a darker option, and you can do a similar one to get a shade, a tint as well. So let's first get a shade. Let's go just a little bit more towards red, I think, a little bit darker down, and boom, there's the shade of our pink. Let's take the same one. I'm going to go a little bit more towards pink this time, and then add some light to get 3 shades of pink that I like to work with. Let's do the same thing for the blue. So the blue here, I'm going to go a little bit more towards the green, and we're going to just grab a bit more darkness in there for a nice dark shade of blue. I'm not too sold on that. I might go a touch back. That's much better, more towards the blue as opposed to the green. This one here, let's try going towards the green and lighting it up just a little bit. Bam. So now we've got 3 shades of blue and 3 shades of pink, which is pretty good. We are definitely going to need a green though. So I'm going to select my middle color again, which remember was my base color. I'm going to go up like so. And I'm going to select all of these because we're just choosing the base green here. And I'm just going to hue shift until I find a starting point green that I quite like. Around here. Now that looks way too saturated, and that's because obviously different amounts of light work differently depending on the hue that you've selected. So I probably would desaturate this just a little bit, especially because we'll be using it in the backgrounds, until I get a green that I'm fairly happy with, which I think that's pretty much there. And at this point, you're basically just eyeballing it until you find a color that you like. But try to maintain in the middle row a similar amount of like value. And what value is like the cumulative amount of light, darkness, hue, everything mixed together to get this value that is like the finished result. And you'll be able to see if something is too saturated, it's going to have more value. I'm not sure if that's the technical way to use the term, but it's the way that I use it. So I'm going to do the same thing for the green. I'm going to shift a little bit more towards blue and perhaps add some darkness to it. So with hue shifting there, you can see we don't get that muddiness that we did get before. I'm going to shift a little bit more towards this turquoise color and add some light. And we've got 3 shades of green. And as you can see, we've got a fairly good looking complementary palette there to start working with. But now that we have these colors here, we probably want to add them to our actual swatches. And we want to learn how to use gradients within these as well to add some more color control. So if you open up your swatches window, you'll see here that if I pull this out, I have my default selection of swatches, and I've got an already made selection of colors here, which I've put together previously, obviously because I've made this all already. Now, working with swatches is great because you've got two different types of swatches that you can use. You can add just a basic swatch by going to a new folder. I'm just going to call this one test because I'll be removing it later on. I can select one of my dark greens, click the test folder and click add, and that will add that swatch to your folder here, which is great. We can do the same thing with the next one, same thing with the next one, and so on until we get our full list of colors inside our palette. And they'll be added in the order in which you select them. So it's up to you how to group these. I like to group them by color. Some people like to group them by shade. Some people like to group them by other stuff. I think it works best when you can see all of your correct colors like so. Now, if you go to your color window again, window and color up here, you'll notice you've got some different options such as solid color, linear gradient, radial gradient, or bitmap fill. Now, a solid color is exactly as you suggest. You eyedropper with the eye tool, eye keyboard shortcut to pick a color, and it will show you a solid color and show you the hex code, RGB value for that, etc., etc. We want to work with some gradients though, so I'm going to choose linear gradient. And what you can do with a linear gradient is double click on one end of the gradient. It will bring up your swatches window, and you'll notice we've got our swatches in it here. So I could choose, for example, my light green, do the same on the other end, but choose my dark green. And I now have a gradient. And with this add to swatches button, I can add, if you just click and drag across from the default swatches, I can add a linear gradient to my swatches, which means that I can draw using a gradient, which is incredibly powerful. Now, once you've added all of the gradients and different combinations you think you might need to your color palette, you'll end up with a folder full of everything that you need. I'm just going to delete my test folder, and I'm going to delete my default swatches folder. So I've just got Intro to Adobe Animate 2021 with all of my colors in the swatch panel. I'm then going to hit Save Colors, call it Intro to Adobe Animate 2021, hit Save. Yes. Now what this means is I can pull up this whenever I want by just hitting, well, clear colors, first of all. I can hit Replace Colors, load my color palette in, and use it in any different project that I want. It will give you all the default swatches back, but that's fine. You can just close that folder down. Okay. I find it quite useful to have my default swatches panel open. Just like hovering up here in the left, and you can click this little label to collapse it, and then you can just open and close at a click. And what we can do now is go through and add these colors to our palette, and we will see how we can control our linear gradients and things like that, and add highlights and things to give ourselves a bit more control over our animation here. So let's do the background first, because that's going to be quite simple. So I'm going to grab my clouds layer, double click to go inside the graphic. And if you remember here, what we've got is our individual cloud. So one cloud on its own layer and another cloud on its own layer. So I'm going to select both of these clouds, open up my swatches panel, and give them just a white outline. Okay. Inside these white outlines now, I'm going to select my paint bucket with K, and I'm going to fill them in with white as well, like so. So we've just got two white clouds. And just to make it easier to see, I am going to drag them off as well, like this. Okay. Now, one thing I like to do with clouds and with lots of my colors really is add a linear gradient on top of my flat color so that you can add a bit more depth without too much extra work. Just fill in that tiny dot there. To do that, I like to select both of these objects here, Control C, and on a layer above them, I just hit Control Shift V, and that will place them paste them in place. From there, I'll go back, and I've created a linear gradient that goes from white to my first blue color here. And I'm just going to click that, and that's going to apply it across my clouds. Now, you can control whether it's radial or linear, doesn't matter. You can control your gradient with your gradient tool. If you don't see your gradient transform tool, it's hidden underneath the free transform tool. If you long press on that, you'll get gradient transform tool. The shortcut for that is F, by the way. And it'll open up this little overlay, which at first might look confusing, but it's actually quite simple. Essentially, you have the center of your gradient here. You can control that by clicking and dragging your dot around, and you'll notice I can pull the entire shape around like this. Then you have two controls on the edges here. A circle at the edge will allow you to rotate your gradient, so change the direction of it, and pulling in or out on on this arrow will increase or decrease the width of your gradient. So I would like to rotate it so that the blue is on the bottom, and I would like to decrease it so that it's pretty heavy, and I would like to put the center point just below our cloud. And I'm going to do that with this one as well. Just quickly make the blue go to the bottom, drag in the width, bring it down so the center point is just below, like that. And what I like to do then is come along the edge of my cloud here and actually cut out a segment, which is why I do it on its own layer. So I'm just going to lock these other two cloud layers, select this above cloud layer, and forgive me, I'm doing this with the mouse at the moment. I'm just going to come in with my pencil tool and I'm just going to draw a section of the cloud over top, which will create this sort of separating line. Now, I will set that to smooth because if I don't, it's going to look awful trying to do it with the mouse. Essentially, I'm just going to be cutting out a section from the top of this cloud, which allows me to select this fill on the top. I can then delete it, double click my line, hit delete again. And you'll notice if you zoom in a bit more, you'll see it clearer. You've now got this white line, this white bounce along the top of the cloud, which adds quite a nice bit of depth to our artwork. So I'll be doing the same thing here. And in fact, I will just quickly get my small graphics tablet. This is a Wacom Intuos Small. You know me that I use my Wacom Cintiq where I draw on the screen. But this one allows me to draw on a tablet directly and will make this section at least a little bit easier. So I can draw out that top section there, delete the top section of this fill, double click to select the entire pencil line and just delete that. And again, going back to the mouse now, you can see that I've got these separate shapes here, which are now part of the same cloud layer. So I can select everything, just unlock it all, position it back. Boom. And there we've used solid fills and gradient fills to create our nice clouds. Now this is on the sky layer. So what I am going to do is just drag out a rectangle with no fill, no stroke, sorry, which I can do by selecting the stroke over here. Go to the fill section of my color window and just choose the blue for the sky. And I'm just going to drag out a sky box behind it just so we can see the clouds a little bit easier. For the sun, that's just going to be a nice flat color for now because we're going to be coming back to the sun in a later episode and doing some shape morphing. So I'm just going to fill that in with the paint bucket tool like so. Same thing for the mountains. We're not going to go overboard here. What I will probably do is choose a slightly lighter color for this center mountain. So to do that, I'm just going to select this inner section and choose this kind of light green. Select these two outer sections, choose the slightly darker green. And for the border between them, I don't know whether I'm just going to choose the same dark green. You could even go to one of our gradients here. But I quite like that look where we've got the distant mountains sort of overlapping these two front ones here, like so. So drop back to our main composition here. And let's do the same thing with the grass, but we'll add a gradient to the grass like we did with the clouds. So we'll select our bright green layer for that. All I'm going to do this time is Control C, add in a new layer, Control Shift V. Okay. Going to just shift that down just a little bit. Okay. And because it's on our own layer, we can kind of manipulate it however we want. So I'm going to move that over just a little. And then I'm going to give it my green gradient that I set up earlier. I'm going to go to my gradient transform tool. I'm going to decrease its width, rotate it so that the dark green is on the bottom, like so. And here is a good trick. You can then lock your second layer, lock your original layer, and on your gradient overlay layer, you can just select that content. Oh, excuse me. There we go. You can just select that content. And with your eraser tool, you can then just erase out certain sections. For example, if I zoom in a little bit, decrease the size of my brush, and I just come in and do a few little tufts. Yeah. Just all over the place, just a couple of grassy tufts, like so. Now, you don't want to do too many of these because we've got our looping section. So if you wanted them to loop perfectly, you would do this before we did the duplicate that we did in the last session. So in fact, what I will do is I'll just make sure, if I undo those, I will just make sure that where my marks are erased, they shouldn't loop. So I think I can just do that by making sure it starts and ends with nothing on screen. But you get the point there, okay? I'll come back to that bit later, perhaps. But you can see when we drop back out of this, we've now got these slightly lighter grass tufts. And when we start rocking them in like this, you can see how it's not going to loop. So that's why you should do that before you've duplicated your grass here, which is a mistake that I made. Okay. Same thing goes for this section here. I've duplicated this grass already, so I can't really do anything different. But what I can do is select all of my grass tufts without selecting the black outline, copy those, paste them in place on top. On the layer underneath, I'm just going to select everything and just give it the bright green layer, okay, rather than the black outline. And in fact, why not do that for our grass here as well, so that it's less of a visual weight compared to our characters. Then our characters will be the only things outlined. Let's do that in dark green, so we've got a nice border on it there. Back inside our grass tufts layer, I can go to the layer on top. I can now make that green. I'll add a new layer on top of it. Control-Shift-V. Add the gradient tool. Select my transform gradient tool, like so. And select each of these. So you can see you can come through and you can tweak them individually. I quite like it just going from left to right in this instance though. So I think what I will do is come in here, select just these three, lock the other layers, and using my eraser, instead of the pencil tool this time, I'm just going to come in and just unpaint or erase, not unpaint, some of the edges here on my grass. You know, just adding a bit more detail to the tufts, making it look a little bit more interesting. And this is a great way to add highlights quickly. Okay. And once you've done that with 3 sections that you like, there's nothing stopping you just, if like me, you've already duplicated these, holding Alt-Shift and dragging them over to duplicate. And that way you'll get your perfect loop again. And you can see your grass tufts moving by. So the rest of these characters, because they're animated, there's going to be no gradients on them. They're just going to be plain flat colors. So I'll come through and do that in a quick time lapse, so you don't have to watch me do that. And then I'll quickly explain with a duplicate of our character here some of the effects, and then that'll be it for this episode. So stick with me and I'll see you in a second. Look everyone, it's a cameo from Phoebe. Say hello everyone. Hello Phoebe. Hello. Nah, she doesn't want to be up here. Okay, so here we have our fully colored animation, which is fantastic. So the next step is to just show you a couple of effects that you can apply to different movie clips, such as drop shadows and things like that. So let's just jump right into that final section of this tutorial. Okay, so first I'll show you all the effects you can apply to a single graphic. Now, as you can see here, we spoke about in our symbols episode, the difference between graphics and movie clips. And one of the differences is the color effects that you can apply. For example, if you select one of your graphics here, you can choose between 4 different color effects. Brightness is the first one, which just adds direct white or black value, which is great for making shadows. For example, if I duplicated this object here, turn the brightness all the way down to 0, and plonked another one on top, like so, you can get a duplicate, like hard shadow added to each of your frames, because it's just a duplicate of the graphic, which is really useful. Okay. Secondly, quite simply, you can add tint. Now, what tint does is essentially adds a large amount of white the more that you increase the tint, but you can also decrease the colors to change the color of the tint. So you can say, I want to add 50% white with pure white, or you can tint it with a different color. So if I were to reduce green to 0, we'd be tinting it with a direct purple, because we have a combination of red and blue together. Okay, so that's a 50% tint of purple. If you were to reduce red and green, it would be a 50% tint of blue, and so on and so forth. Okay, quite simple. The third effect that you can do with the graphic is advanced. And this is like a combination of the fourth effect and the tint effect. So you can decrease the color balance. So you can change the overall color balance of your graphic by changing the amounts of red, green, and blue that are involved in it. So for example, you could reduce all of the blue and just have full green and red in it, and it will give you a different tint. And then you can reduce the overall see-throughness of that graphic as well, which can be quite useful. And the final effect is just that, again, see-throughness, which they call alpha, which just shows how see-through something is. If I were to drag this one, for example, you can see that I can now half see through that same symbol. So 4 different color effects that you can apply there, which, as you can see, can be quite useful in certain circumstances, hopefully at least. So let's see what you can do with a movie clip as opposed to a graphic. So as you know, the first difference with a movie clip is that it will not play in your timeline. So we can't preview any of these, but what we can do is still create a number of duplicates of them and apply individual effects to each duplicate. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is select it, go over here, and you can see that under color effects, we have the same options: brightness, tint, advanced, and alpha. But we now have an additional menu called filters. Now under filters, you can add things that you might see in Illustrator or Photoshop. For example, a drop shadow will just add, like we did with the duplicate graphic before, a blurred or completely unblurred copy of your graphic symbol or movie clip symbol. You can adjust the distance and the amount of blur, as well as the color of the shadow entirely. So you could make it green, for example. I always leave it on quality high. You can also knock out the original, which gives you basically just the shadow, which can be quite useful. You can make it on an inner shadow, which kind of makes it like an inner glow. Maybe a particular light has hit a character and you can make it glow like that. And you can hide the original object as well. So that's drop shadow, could be quite useful. The next filter is blur, which just directly blurs as if your object is out of focus. Can be quite useful when you're doing camera depth and layer tracking and things like that, which we'll get to in a later tutorial. Very useful. Make a few more duplicates of our character here. The next one after blur is glow, and this creates kind of like a drop shadow, apart from it's like an outer glow around your entire object. You can make an inner glow around the entire object. So a drop shadow is directional, whereas the glow is universal. And again, you can do things like the knockout and stuff like that as well. Maybe if you made it the same pink, it would look quite good if you did knockout. Knockout is quite useful when you want to make like lightsaber style effects, basically, which is quite useful sometimes in certain situations. The next one after that, I'm just making sure I've got a clean copy, is bevel, and it kind of tries to make your object look a little bit 3D. So if we increase like that, you can see it kind of rounds off the edges of my characters a little bit. You can increase the distance, which makes it stronger or weaker, and can be actually quite nice in certain situations. It could be an outer, an inner, or a full bevel, which is both. Inner bevel is the most common one that you can see. And you can change the colors of your highlights as well. If you wanted the dark and lighter colors to be within your color palette, for example. As you can see, it makes quite a nice effect for some things. Bevel is largely considered outdated, but for working in Adobe Animate and stuff like that, can actually look quite nice in certain circumstances. So after bevel, we have got gradient glow, which does a similar thing to normal glow, apart from you can apply a gradient to it. So in the same way you can edit other gradients, you can just adjust, for example, adding in different colors and things like that to your gradient. Basically a very complicated gradient glow around the edge. I've never used this one. I can't think of a situation where it could be useful, maybe for some special effects or something like that. But again, I probably would just take it into After Effects if I wanted to do effects that are that detailed. In addition to gradient glow, you've got gradient bevel, which is the exact same thing. I'm not really going to take you through it because it's the same thing. It just does a bevel. And apart from gradient bevel, you've got adjust color. And this is kind of like adjusting the overall colors of your entire graphic. So you can change the hue, for example, of the entire graphic, and all of its relative colors. Colors will remain relative to each other. Same thing with the saturation. It increases everything globally within inside that symbol. So that sort of thing. So you can see here, there's quite a few different effects that in certain situations can be quite useful. I do like drop shadow and I do like bevel. I can't say that I use the other ones too much, but they are quite useful to have there. So that was a bit of an oddball episode all over the place, but is what it is really when it comes down to it. The one thing you might want to use in an animation like this is the bevel. to add some fake roundness to your characters, but I quite like the simple style, which is why I did it in a separate document over here for us in this particular instance. So thank you very much for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. We're getting into the deep dive of Adobe Animate now, and the next few episodes I think are going to be quite cool, going into specific features. So hopefully you'll stick around for those, and I'll see you next time on another episode of TipTut. A very heartfelt thank you to my level 2 and above members: Ghosts, WN62, Anonymous, Mel M. Hoover, Maybe Sharma, Ralika M, Mun336, Ian Costello, Dushyant Singe, DaVinci Goel, and Lone Wolf number 16. Thank you so much, you guys, and I hope you have a lovely Christmas.
Remember to subscribe for more tips, tricks, and tutorials. Thanks for watching.